ladies and gentlemen. The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society, and we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. We decided long ago that the dangers of excessive and unwarranted concealment of pertinent facts far outweighed the dangers which are cited to justify it. Even today, there is little value in opposing the threat of a closed society by imitating its arbitrary restrictions. Even today, there is little value in ensuring the survival of our nation if our traditions do not survive with it. And there is very grave danger that an announced need for increased security will be seized upon by those anxious to expand its meaning to the very limits of official censorship and concealment. That I do not intend to permit to the extent that it's in my control. And no official of my administration, whether his rank is high or low, civilian or military, should interpret my words here tonight as an excuse to censor the news, to stifle dissent, to cover up our mistakes, or to withhold from the press and the public the facts they deserve to know. For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence, on infiltration instead of invasion, on subversion instead of elections, on intimidation instead of free choice, on guerrillas by night instead of armies by day.
There are 535 people on Capitol Hill whose job it is to write the laws that govern all of us, and he is one of them. There are 535 people on Capitol Hill whose job it is to preserve the Constitution, and he is one of them. There are 535 people whose job it is to preserve our liberties, and he is one of them. But in his heart and in his head, in his character and in his intellect, in what he has done and in what he will become, the Thomas Jefferson of our day, Ron Paul, is one of us.
I say this with amazement, but it's becoming more and more clear that we live in the age of Ron Paul, Judge. I mean, you stop and think about it. Who's the father of the Tea Party? It's Ron Paul. Not only is he the father of the Tea Party that won the majority of the House for Republicans in the 2010 midterm, but he's the father of so much of the discussion about the budget, about the debt ceiling, about taxes right now. This is the age of Ron Paul.
Where are the real conservatives? Where are the people that say all of this stuff that the Fed is doing is socialism? There was one, Ron Paul, but they drummed him out of the Republican Party.
I agree now with Ron Paul more than I did in 2008, and we have a choice, and I think this is the choice that's going to happen to us. You can't live in this middle ground with our Constitution. You can't. You either embrace the Constitution or shed the Constitution. And Ron Paul is the closest to our founders out of anyone up there.
When the people fear the government, that is tyranny. But when the government fears the people, that's liberty.
That is liberty. And liberty will reign in America.
Dr. Paul, who are you considering to be your vice presidential running mate?
The name Judge Napolitano jumps right out.
Something that you told your crowd yesterday, I believe you were in Kansas City last night, where you said we, meaning the United States, we're slipping into a fascist system where it's a combination of government and big business and authoritarian rule and the suppression of the individual rights of each and every American citizen. Thematically, I have heard this before from you. A fascist system is one of those things that's going to catch attention. Do you really think that the U.S. now has a fascist system? And point to me, some examples of that.
No. Well, no, I don't think we do, but I worry about it a lot. Because we have a system of economics. We don't have socialism. What we have is interventionism. And when intervention exists, it serves the interests of the powerful special interests. And guess who they are? They're the big banks and the very wealthy corporations, and they get these benefits. So interventionism starts off with a combination of partnership between big business and government. And just look at the bailouts. Who got the bailouts? The middle class didn't get it. And, did you see that statistic? I think it was CNN that showed I do the best with the middle class because I understand this. But no, there's a coalition of big business and big government. And why I'm getting more nervous is because fascism usually suggests this authoritarian, ruthless rule of government. And they think of Mussolini and Hitler. But just think of this change in civil liberties that nobody wants to talk about. The arrest of American citizens now by the military and held indefinitely without a trial, and people aren't concerned about it. So yes, if we have economic chaos and something like what is in Greece or much worse, yes, they could clamp down on us. So this is why I do worry about it. But we don't have this now. And I even mentioned last night in the speech, I said, we're not there. At least we can come and visit and meet, and we can have meetings like this, and we can change the course because we actually changed that bill on Stop Online Piracy Act. So people can still act out. So we're not there, but there's reasons why we should not be complacent.
US presidential contender Ron Paul has warned that his country is slipping into a fascist system with a broke government ruled by big business. Speaking to supporters in Kansas City, the Republican candidate said Americans' individual liberties were being stripped away. Let's now talk to radio host and author Stephen Lemon, who's just come off air, just done a radio program. Good to have you here on RT, Stephen. Now, do you agree with Ron Paul then?
Oh, I absolutely agree with him, Bill. America is a fascist state. The only thing I disagree with Ron Paul about is it's not slipping into it, it's deep into it. Imagine, Bill, in the 1930s, 1935, I believe, Sinclair Lewis wrote a novel called It Can't Happen Here. It was about a politician riding to power on populist rhetoric, and when he got it, he became a fascist despot. George Selders, the marvelous U.S. journalist that lived, I believe, to over age 100, died in the mid-1990s. He worried about U.S. fascism in the 1930s under Franklin Roosevelt. A man named Bertram Gross in the 1980s wrote a book called Friendly Fascism. He said when it arrives, it'll be with a friendly face. And he used Ronald Reagan as a fascist prototype, smiling while brutalizing and destroying U.S. freedoms. Today, Bill, we have deeply repressive police state laws. The most recent was slipped into the National Defense Authorization Act on the last day of 2011 that gives the U.S. government the right to let the military arrest and throw in military dungeons U.S. citizens anywhere in the world, charge them, leave them uncharged, give them a military tribunal trial, give them no trial, let them rot in prisons forever. If that isn't a fascist dictatorship, what is?
All right, Stephen, he was also targeting big business. In many ways, is he trying to jump on the Occupy Wall Street movement here?
Well, he is very upset, especially about the Federal Reserve. I am not a Ron Paul supporter, but I absolutely support his opposition to imperial wars. He has gone after the Federal Reserve for years. It's a repressive group. It's privately owned and operated. It isn't federal, and it doesn't have reserves, as Ron Paul explains. It's owned by the major bankers, mainly the Wall Street ones, and they use money power to create more of it at the public's expense. As long as the system goes on this way, that and democracy cannot coexist. It doesn't, and these fascist bankers are allied with the fascist militarists. They're brutalizing people abroad. They're brutalizing people at home. That's the reality Americans have to wake up to. They need to understand it. They need to know their liberties are fast disappearing, and only they Only they can change things. They're very dismissive. Occupy Wall Street has woken up, but we need mass American awakening to take on this beast that's destroying
Okay,
them.
Stephen, in what way then should you see this mass awakening? Ron Paul is talking about the predictions of future unrest. Is he actually encouraging unrest in order for people's views to be heard?
Well, I think sooner or later it comes. Look what happened in Tsarist Russia in 1917, where pressure got severe enough. People rose up. They overthrew the dictatorship. Look what's going on in Greece right now. Furious people, their lives are being destroyed in real time. I think it's only a matter of time before they don't just rally and storm in front of the parliament, but they break into it and they haul these criminal politicians out by the scruff of their necks, and they either put them on trial or they hang them. They deserve to be hanged. They're criminals. They're not serving their people. They've sold them into deep poverty. The same thing is happening across Europe. It's happening in America more slowly. Sooner or later, what Gerald Celente says is true. When people lose everything and have nothing else to lose, they lose it. They lose it. That means violence. That means rising up against a repressive power and overthrowing it. And the marvelous anthropologist Margaret Mead once said, it doesn't take a lot of people to do this. She said, never underestimate the power of a few committed people to change the world. And her punchline was, it's the only way it ever happens. Indeed so. It's up to us.
Stephen, your words there will stir up a lot of reaction, many against and many for your views. Thank you very much indeed, Stephen. Stephen Lemon joining us live there, radio host and author.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Paul, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to introduce a very simple piece of legislation to repeal the infamous Section 1021 of the National Defense Authorization Act, quietly signed into law by the President on New Year's Day. What a way to usher in the new year. Section 1021 essentially codifies into law the very dubious claim of presidential authority under 2001 authorization for the use of military force to indefinitely detain American citizens without access to legal representation or due process of law. Section 1021 provides for the possibility of the U.S. military acting as a kind of police force on U.S. soil, apprehending terror suspects, including Americans, and whisking them off to an undisclosed location indefinitely. No right to attorney, no right to trial, no day in court. This is precisely the kind of egregious distortion of justice that Americans have always ridiculed in so many dictatorships overseas. A great man named Solzhenitsyn became the hero of so many of us when he exposed the Soviet Union's extensive Gulag system. Is this really the kind of a United States we want to create in name of fighting terrorism? Some have argued that nothing in Section 1021 explicitly mandates holding Americans without trial, but it employs vague language, radically expanding the detention authority to include anyone who has substantially supported certain terrorist groups or associated forces. No one has defined what those terms mean. What is an associated force? Sadly, too many of my colleagues are too willing to undermine our Constitution to support such outrageous legislation. One senator even said about American citizens being picked up under this section of the NDAA, quote, when they say, I want a lawyer, you tell them, shut up. You don't get a lawyer, close quote. Is this acceptable in someone who has taken an oath to uphold the Constitution? Mr. Speaker, of course, I recognize how critical it is that we identify and apprehend those who are suspected of plotting attacks against Americans. But why do we have so little faith in our judicial system? Have we not tried in civilian court and won convictions of hundreds of individuals for terrorist or related activities? I fully support continuing to do so. But let us not abandon what is so unique and special about our system of government in the process. I hope my colleagues will join my effort to overturn this shameful Section 1021 of the National Defense Authorization Act. And I yield back.
Chair recognizes the gentlelady from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee, for 5 minutes.
And when they say, I want my lawyer, you tell them, shut up.
Your time is
Don't get a
expired.
lawyer. You're an enemy combatant.
Facing deep spending cuts, our president is threatening another war, this one against Iran. Joining me now is retired U.S. Army Intelligence Colonel Anthony Schaefer, author of Operation Dark Heart. Colonel Schaefer, it's always a pleasure. Welcome here.
Always good to be on with you, Judge.
Thank you. Colonel, many people who are self-proclaimed hawks, who say that they are strongly in favor of the defense of the United States of America from enemies real and imagined, have attacked Ron Paul as having an unrealistic or even a dangerous view about our foreign policy. You, a career military officer, have defended Ron Paul. Make the case.
Well, I have. Now, don't forget, Ron Paul and I debated on John Stossel's show back in May, and we have differences. But with that said, he has the most realistic policy regarding Iran, Judge, because of two things. First, the Iranians may already have the bomb, and this rhetoric from the other candidates, you know, Santorum and Romney, is not only uninformed, it's ill-advised. I think it's silly. Secondly, Jim DeMeth even said this. We cannot hope to continue to have an expeditionary military to the size we have based on the fact we just don't have the money. Therefore, you have to be very precise, very realistic in what threats are real. And I think Ron Paul's policy is the most accurate based on what we need to face as a nation going forward.
You spent a year in military intelligence, so you know of whom I'm about to speak. The head of the Israeli Mossad says Iran is not a threat to Israel, and if it is, we can deal with it on our own. And Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says the same thing. Why do you think Ron Paul is the only Republican who agrees with them, and the other Republicans are disagreeing with them?
Well, that's a mystery to me, because the Israelis themselves have said, leave us alone, we'll deal with what we have to deal with as a country. Frankly, right now at this point in time, we need to allow the Israelis to do what they feel necessary to feel secure. I mean, it's their country, it's their issues. With that said, we have to take a realistic look at what we need to hold sacred regarding our own self-interest as a nation. The idea of involving ourselves in expensive wars, frankly, President Reagan
There's a bill now to stop online Piracy Act. They want to take over the internet. I mean, can you imagine how much we're going to be curtailed in the spreading of our information if we lose the internet? But there's a bill, it's supposedly going to stop privacy, but actually what's going to do is take over internet and be able to restrict everybody what they do and monitor everything we do.
But we begin tonight with a tale of two speeches, both from the same man, both from President Obama. One speech that could have been billed as a ballad to the Constitution, a proclamation of American values, a repudiation of the lawless behavior of the last presidential administration, and another speech announcing a radical new claim of presidential power that is not afforded by the Constitution and that has never been attempted in American history, even by George W. Bush and Dick Cheney. Remarkably, President Obama today made both of those speeches simultaneously. Standing inside the National Archives in front of the actual original Constitution, President Obama delivered a blistering critique of the Bush administration, in which he called their actions and their legacy literally a mess.
Our government made a series of hasty decisions. Poorly planned, haphazard approach. Too often, we set those principles aside as luxuries that we could no longer afford. Our government made decisions based on fear rather than foresight. The decisions that were made over the last 8 years established an ad hoc legal approach for fighting terrorism that was neither effective nor sustainable.
An ad hoc legal approach for fighting terrorism that was neither effective nor sustainable. Ouch. Then, moments later, he announced his own ad hoc legal approach for fighting terrorism. President Obama today proposed something new, something called prolonged detention. Doesn't sound that bad, right? Prolonged detention. Did you ever see the movie Minority Report? It was based on a Philip K. Dick short story. Came out in 2002. It starred Tom Cruise, remember? He played a police officer in something called the Department of Pre-Crime. Pre-crime is where people are arrested and incarcerated to prevent crimes that they have not yet committed.
Mr. Marks, by mandate of the District of Columbia Pre-Crime Division, I'm placing you under arrest for the future murder of Sarah Marks and Donald Dubinos. Take place today, April 22nd, at 0800 hours, 4 minutes. No, I didn't do anything.
You didn't do anything, but you're gonna. Future murder. Creepy, right? Putting somebody in jail not for what they've done, but for what you're very sure they're going to do?
There may be a number of people who cannot be prosecuted for past crimes. In some cases because evidence may be tainted, but who nonetheless pose a threat to the security of the United States.
We're not prosecuting them for past crimes, but we need to keep them in prison because of our expectation of their future crimes.
Al-Qaeda terrorists and their affiliates are at war with the United States, and those that we capture, like other prisoners of war, must be prevented from attacking us again.
Prevented. We will incarcerate people preventively. Preventive incarceration. Indefinite detention without trial. That's what this is. That's what President Obama proposed today, if you strip away the euphemisms. One civil liberties advocate told the New York Times today, quote, "We've known this was on the horizon for many years, but we were able to hold it off with George Bush. The idea that we might find ourselves fighting with the Obama administration over these powers is really stunning." And it is stunning, particularly to hear President Obama claim the power to keep people in prison indefinitely with no charges against them, no conviction, no sentence, just imprisonment. It's particularly stunning to hear him make that claim in the middle of a speech that was all about the rule of law.
And that's not the way you make an economy work. That's what we've been trying to do for years, and we've accelerated that in the last year. And it's just stumbling along. It reminds me of the 1930s. And we're going to spend a lot of time and a lot of money doing this, but it's not going to solve our problem. You know, they say that we're going to have trillion-dollar deficits for years to come. At the same time, we want to be fiscal conservatives and start talking about budgetary reforms. Like changing the budget is a tactical thing, and it's only a budgetary problem. But to me, it's a philosophic problem. Why are we spending all this money? Why do we run the world empire? And why do we have a welfare state? And how did we get ourselves into this mess? And how did we allow this monetary system to do this to us? But we cannot solve our problem by doing exactly the same thing that got us into this mess.
This idea, Congressman Paul, of trillion-dollar deficits for years to come, it's almost like trillion has become the new billion. And if you say it quickly, maybe it doesn't hurt so much. But just how much pain could this leave for our children and grandchildren?
Well, you know, we talk about that a lot, and we should, but I'm afraid that this generation is going to suffer because I think the confidence eventually will be lost. You know, if $2 trillion a year budget doesn't seem to quite work, and that's the tactic, why not have a $4 trillion? Eventually the confidence will be lost. It'll be lost in the system. The financial system broke down because they lost confidence in it because it was built on illusions. But soon they're going to lose confidence in the dollar. Now that'll be a crisis that'll be much bigger than the crisis we're facing today.
So if you were the president's chief economic advisor or you were running the budget office, what would you do?
I would balance the budget, and I would tell people to save their money and that we should cut spending. But where we would cut spending is not domestic. We spend over $1 trillion a year maintaining our world empire. We can afford to do less overseas because what we do overseas just causes problems for us. The Soviet system came down because they overextended themselves in Afghanistan. They bankrupted that country, and actually Osama bin Laden said, I'm going to bankrupt the Soviets, and they'll have to leave, and they did. Right. We're doing the same thing, but we're too extended. We could cut, balance the budget, cut spending, and let the people go back to work, go to savings, and let the market operate.
So, Dr. Paul, you obviously know a lot about economics, you know a lot about finance, but noted and Nobel Prize-winning economist Paul Krugman has said we need to have a stimulus package. It needs to be a big stimulus package, and we need to have it quickly.
Well, yeah, he comes from a different view, but I doubt if he ever read Austrian economics. I don't even know if he knows who Mises is and Hayek and Rothbard, the people who talked about free market. He's not a free market person. Matter of fact, we haven't had free market policies in this country for a long, long time, because once you have a Federal Reserve System, they are the central economic planners. They manipulate the economy by artificially lowering interest rates. So the economists you hear from in our universities and from Washington, D.C. are all interventionists. They're liberals, they're Keynesians. So if they're still winning the Nobel Prize for economics, then we're in serious trouble. But fortunately for us, there are a lot more people in this country who are waking up to the fact that the culprit is really the Federal Reserve, the monetary system, and this spendthrift Congress that we have and government. And once that's realized and we have enough people, it will change, because we can't continue to do what we're doing now. Well, something has to give.
Yeah, there's no question that this idea of running multi-year trillion-dollar deficits is more than just a little shocking. Congressman Ron Paul, it's always good to talk to you. Thanks for coming in this morning. We'll see you again soon.
Thank you very much.
Right. But Senators McCain and Levin have added this legislation which would authorize the president to declare the entire United States of America, all 50 states and all territories, to be a battlefield, even though there's no battle, thanks be to God, going on here.
War on terror is different.
And that would authorize him to use commander-in-chief authority in the United States, to use the military to arrest people in the United States who, in the president's opinion, are enemies of the country. It would then permit him to incarcerate and detain these people indefinitely, to keep them from a lawyer, to keep them from a judge, to keep them from a jury, to lock them up for as long as he wants.
Okay, so now if some al-Qaeda guy slipped across our border and tried to blow something up, you'd have no problem with the President of the United States saying, okay, that guy goes to Gitmo.
I would. It's not me that would have the problem, it's the Constitution that has the problem. Because the Constitution specifically says no person, not no American, no person shall lose life, liberty, or property.
So terrorists have
rights. They do, but that's not the problem with this. The problem with this is Senator Lindsey Graham, who supports it, has argued that this would authorize the President of the United States to arrest Americans by simply saying they gave up their citizenship rights.
Here's what Lindsey Graham says. Basically, say in law, for the first time, the homeland is part of the battlefield and people can go to jail indefinitely, American citizen or not. So you're just afraid down the road that one day the President of the United States, whomever he or she might be, might say, okay, let's arrest that guy.
Suppose the President decided that one of his political opponents was an enemy of the state. He could make that person disappear. Sounds fanciful, sounds crazy, but it's true.
Quickly, will this pass?
I don't know if it will pass. There's a lot of other controversial aspects of this bill, including the right to carry guns in all 50 states, which conservatives and libertarians like.
All right.
So it's going to be a debate, and it's going to be a close one.
And they have debates each and every night on Freedom Watch over on the Fox Business Network. Judge Andrew Napolitano, we thank you very much.
Thank you, Steve.
A lot of cash was passed through, and a lot of people suppose it was passed through the Federal Reserve when there was a provisional government after 2003 invasion. It was not, that money was not appropriated by the Congress as the Constitution says.
Well, Congressman, these specific allegations you've made, I think, are absolutely bizarre, and I have absolutely no knowledge of anything remotely like what you just described.
Today's hearing provides us with 12 billion reasons to be concerned about fraud, waste, and abuse. In a 13-month period from May 2003 to June 2004, the Federal Reserve sent nearly $12 billion in cash, mainly in $100 bills from the United States to Iraq. To do that, the Federal Reserve Bank in New York had to pack 281 million individual bills, including more than 107 $100 bills, onto wooden pallets to be shipped to Iraq. The cash weighed more than 363 tons and was loaded onto C-130 cargo planes to be flown into Baghdad. The numbers are so large that it doesn't seem possible that they're true. Who in their right mind would send 360 tons of cash into a war zone? But that's exactly what our government did.